My friends, I take a couple days off, and when I get back, I learn the Russian army opened yet another front, and that the first Ukrainian lines of defense are collapsing. On the 18th of June, Russian Group Center launched a surprise offensive towards the Ukrainian stronghold of Toretsk. Here the Kyiv Post reported, Russia swoops on Ukraine's once calm Toretsk. The Guardian, residents flee as war arrives in Toretsk. I visited Toretsk. Oops, I mean Toretsk. I promise, the situation is under complete control. Now the dramatic part is that Ukrainians held these fortifications for 10 years. And now, just like that, they're all getting wiped out. I'll tell you what happened. Ukrainians got finessed, just like in Avdiivka, through a tunnel. A freaking tunnel. Again! Even worse, in a follow-up attack, another wave of Russian assault squads are approaching a village called Niu-York. Call of Duty called it yet again. Of course, Radio Free Europe coped hard by stating, Russia says it captured Donetsk village as Ukraine targets Crimea. The Russian advanced 4 kilometers towards this town of Niu-York, and near Pivnichne they pushed 3 kilometers deep over a 6-kilometer front. Ukrainian troops are already fighting tooth and nail in the middle of the urban area of Pivnichne. At this point, fierce fighting continues. After each retreat, the Ukrainians launch devastating counterattacks in order to at least partially regain control of the lost positions. To make matters even worse, the Ukrainian army is seriously feeling the lack of manpower. A number of Ukrainian units composed of conscripts simply abandoned their combat positions.
Our men flee the battlefield!
Thus handing over the first lines of defense to the enemy. Вы понимаете, why are such tactical debacles happening more and more? The Ukrainian armed forces are being pulled apart left and right along the entire front, and this makes it difficult to effectively plug the gaps with competent military personnel, namely battalions of newly mobilized Ukrainian conscripts. From an operational perspective, the Russian army is trying to eliminate these two salients, some sort of modern-day battle of the bulge. The first one is centered on the urban area of Toretsk, but the second one is centered on Siversk. There, it's the 106th Guards Airborne Division that was tasked with putting down this stubborn bulge. If these salients fall, Ukraine will be facing multiple Bakhmut-sized urban battles very soon. Welcome to HistoryLegends, and here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. As you know, some of my Ukraine videos have been targeted with limited or no ads. So make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal to keep the show running. Thank you to everyone that has already helped, and welcome to the headquarters. Let's start with the battle for the Toretsk salient. As you can see, this sector is heavily fortified. There's literally one layer of entrenchments, one after the other. Most of these fortifications actually date back from 2014. At its center lies the urban area of Toretsk, inhabited by roughly 50,000 inhabitants before the war. The salient increased in size after the Russian breakthrough at Ocheretine. All of a sudden, Ukrainian forces now had to protect a 45-kilometer front. At the same time, the Toretsk salient is extremely strategic because it separates the Battle of Chasiv Yar from the Russian push on the Avdiivka front. Do you want to laugh? Check this out. According to the clowns of the Institute of the Study of War, the main Russian forces concentration in the Toretsk area is formed of lower quality forces of the Donetsk People's Republic and territorial troops, which will likely struggle to properly execute attacks. I swear, these guys, you can't make this up. This goes to show they completely got fooled by Russian maskirovka. In the meantime, Russian forces used the urban area of Orlivka to camouflage their attack force from NATO satellites. This sector remained more or less calm until the 18th of June, when Ukrainian drones dropped their loads on enemy troops. Problem is, this happened 2 kilometers behind the contact line. By the end of the day, Russian forces positioned in Mayorsk advanced 1.3 kilometers towards these buildings of the local water pumping station, and another 2 kilometers along this tree line towards the settlement of Druzhba.
Fuck.
I actually have a video to show you from this exact position. Here we can easily recognize the 3 white pedestrian bridges going over the railway tracks. So that seems to have been the first position captured by Russian assault squads after a BMP disembarked them there. Then the drone is recording a squad of roughly 8 Russian soldiers. In the next frame, they're heading westwards along the train tracks. And they will do so for almost 2 kilometers. Then these Russian infantry units started clearing the first buildings of Pivnichne one by one. Here you can see what their progression must have looked like along the train tracks until they reached Pivnichne. By the way, the Russians call this place using its old Soviet name Kirove. In this firefight, the Russians come under heavy enemy artillery fire. Shortly after, this unit of 15 to 20 men are running away from the building. Eventually, a tank comes to support the Russian assault squads. From what I can see, Russian assault detachments only faced sporadic resistance from the Ukrainians. Why do you think? I'll give you a hint. Guess how the Russians achieved this breakthrough? That's right, with the tunnel. These naughty Donbass coal miners.
Again!
It's always the same pattern. Russian division commanders use infiltration tactics and local tactical breakthroughs to break the gates open in order to launch a major offensive using hidden reserves. We saw this happen in Avdiivka, Ocheretine, and now Toretsk. Even worse, Arestovich, the former advisor of President Zelensky, said the following in an interview.
У нас прорыв под Торецком. Могу вам привести случай. На одном из ключевых участков фронта позавчера 6 батальонов отказались выполнять боевую задачу. Соседних. 6.
Now 6 battalions seems a bit exaggerated to me, but we could definitely be talking about 6 platoons that fled. So around 250 soldiers. Using a 3D map, if we take a look at this area, we notice there are a lot of these man-made hills. Those are deposits that come from the surrounding mines and that are just piled into large waste heaps. In this video, you can see what they look like from a first-person view. These mounds are very similar to the one we saw near the Avdiivka coke plant. Now, since there used to be heavy mining in this sector, this also means extensive underground infrastructure. You know what, one day we should ask Bald and Bankrupt to explore these abandoned Soviet underground structures in Donbass. Long story short, Russian GRU units pulled out their old Soviet maps and found this abandoned pipeline. Starting on May 14th, the Donbass coal miners started restoring it. Just like in Avdiivka, the plan was to use it as a Trojan horse to bring troops deep inside enemy territory. From what I've read online, the tunnel was built from the settlement of Mayorsk along the Siversk canal for 3 kilometers up to the highway going to Pivnichne. It was also mentioned that former Wagnerians formed the spearhead of the attack. The surprise effect was total and they completely overwhelmed Ukrainian defenders. Even worse, these Ukrainian troops belonged to the 401st Separate Rifle Battalion of the 41st Mechanized Brigade, composed of conscripts from Odessa. Not only that, but there's also a big drama to another unit attached to the 41st Mechanized Brigade, namely the 206th Territorial Defense Battalion. This Ukrainian soldier on Twitter stated that casualties are high, many KIA and wounded. He also said that senior commanders are generally unable or refuse to objectively assess the capabilities of their subordinate personnel. Meanwhile, in this conversation, a soldier is blaming the commander of the 41st Mechanized Brigade, a brigade that performs the most idiotic tasks without any tactical plan. In order to delay the advance of the enemy infantry for 10-15 minutes, it comes at the price of 10-15 Ukrainian lives. So, summary, what I think happened. The tunnel attack created massive panic behind Ukrainian lines, pushing many units to flee and abandon their combat positions. Then this allowed the first wave of Russian troops to advance along the train tracks, facing sporadic enemy resistance. As you can see on the map, the other drama is that these Ukrainian troops abandoned their excellent fortifications to the enemy. June 20th, round 2, this time with the complete collapse of Ukrainian defenses in the sector. This was some sort of historical moment. About this, United 24 wrote, Toretsk has been a Ukrainian stronghold for 10 years. Now Russia is trying to take it. I'm pretty sure Russian soldiers in that sector are already yelling, Toretsk, Nash. From a tactical perspective, Russian assault detachments got a foothold inside the first houses of Druzhba. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces had to withdraw 800 meters along this tree line. However, the feat of arms of the day was the fall of the village of Shumy. 2 days later, by the 22nd of June, a new wave of Russian detachments cleared the remaining Ukrainian entrenchments along this 2-kilometer tree line and brought back some POWs back to the rear. Now we have Russian army soldiers edging right at the outskirts of the villages of Druzhba and Pivnichne. It was just a matter of time before they would release their troops into the urban area of Toretsk. Obviously, Ukraine had to counterattack, but with what units? In this video posted on the 27th of June, we see one of the Ukrainian POWs captured in the sector of Shumy. We learned that he's a junior sergeant, more specifically a combat medic, and that he was mobilized in April 2022 as part of the 24th Mechanized Brigade. This information is confirmed by this pro-Ukrainian deployment map, which indeed shows the 24th Mechanized Brigade deployed in and around Toretsk. Fun fact, the 24th Mechanized is the oldest brigade of the Ukrainian army, as it was created in 1992. Fun fact number 2, I found these pictures of mechanics of the 24th Mechanized Brigade. We have to admit these men form the backbone of the unit, as they're the ones repairing and refurbishing all the vehicles of the brigade. What seems to have happened in Toretsk is that, according to the Ukrainian command, this sector was considered to be calm. So many subunits of the 24th Mechanized Brigade were dispatched left and right across the front. Here, according to Reuters, part of the brigade was deployed near Chasiv Yar. 100% Russian intelligence and recon units must have spotted this transfer of forces over the last few weeks. The Ukraine command also positioned a lot of newbie units just to fill in the gaps. By the 28th of June, assault platoons of the 24th Mechanized Brigade counterattacked from Pivnichne. That's how they cleared this tree line and regained this other one. However, the same day, Russian assault detachments popped out 3 kilometers beyond the front line and got a foothold inside Pivnichne. If all this seemed catastrophic, on July 1st, for Canada Day, 7 kilometers southwest of Pivnichne, Russian Group Center opened a new axis of attack in the Toretsk sector. First line Ukrainian units started calling HQ for immediate support. I don't know, probably the Ukrainian HQ thought it was unjustified panic by some conscripts. Until 24 hours later, when Russian troops had broken through and penetrated Ukrainian lines for 4 kilometers. Yes, the Russians are at the gate of New York. Think about the symbolism of this event. This follow-up Russian offensive was supported by numerous artillery strikes, FAB bombings like this 3-ton bomb, shattering entire buildings and structures, whereas smaller underground positions were taken care of by FPV drone strikes. The concentration of firepower combined with the surprise effect led many Ukrainian units to flee from the battlefield, like this one that was eventually ambushed by drone-dropped grenades. According to the latest news, Russian forces expanded their area of control from Yorivka towards the first houses of the Petrovskaya mountain neighborhood. There it was said that more than a company of Ukrainian military personnel deserted from their combat positions. On the other side of the battle, by July 3rd, elements of the 95th Air Assault Brigade were transferred from the Kremina front towards the eastern outskirts of Toretsk. Those reinforcements were much needed, since the 24th and 41st Mechanized Brigades had to abandon most of its fortifications along a 7-kilometer front. Meanwhile, forward elements of the Russian army are already taking positions deep inside Pivnichne. And as you can see, the Battle of Pivnichne has already turned into messy urban warfare. And the dramatic part is that the Ukrainians barely have prepare defensive positions inside this area. In this video, Ukrainian artillery is striking every building that could be hiding enemy troops. Meanwhile, this Ukrainian soldier is firing his rifle, and then we see him reloading his GP-25 single-shot grenade launcher. At the same time, the Russian troops from the water pumping station also received additional reinforcements, which allowed them to expand their foothold inside Druzhba. But now they're also pushing into Pivnichne from the right flank. At this point, we can expect the Russians to enter New York and clear Ukrainian positions eastwards and westwards. On the 5th of July, there was this drone footage of a Russian sapper detonating a building with enemy troops somewhere in this area, meaning Russian army units could be diverting from the Petrovskaya mountain neighborhood and push northeast instead. Meanwhile, Russian assault detachments will most likely storm Pivnichne from the east via Druzhba, but also from this direction on the left flank against this set of high-rise buildings. Since this area has been heavily shelled by Russian TOS flamethrowers, it's possible that the Russian army will also attack in the center using the cover of this forested area. This will most likely force the Ukrainian army to withdraw from Pivnichne and concentrate on this secondary line of defense along the road crossing over the settlement, which the Russians could try to overwhelm and flank from the east. Meanwhile, further north, there is another salient that the Russians are trying to eliminate. This bulge centered on the settlement of Siversk has been holding strong since the summer of 2022. Now for the Russian command, the problem is that if the Ukrainians want to launch another counteroffensive this year, the Siversk salient is a proper candidate. This salient points directly towards Lysychansk. It's only 12 kilometers away. The Ukrainians could also push towards Popasna and encircle Bakhmut, the big dream of Ukrainian General Sirsky. And on top of that, the Ukrainians could also break through in Crimea and attempt to reconquer Severodonetsk. So the Russian command decided to reduce the bulge using the 106 Guards Airborne Division. Over the course of the last weeks, we witnessed heavy artillery duels in and around the salient. As you can see with this footage from the 2nd of June, Russian counter-battery fire targeted Ukrainian artillery units in Siversk. In this one, they destroyed an enemy tank. As you can imagine, the goal of this battle of attrition was to diminish Ukrainian firepower as much as possible, most likely for large-scale offensive operations. On the 4th of June, Russian paratroopers of the 137th Regiment from Ryazan launched a motorized attack on Razdolivka along the railway line. During the assault, this MTLB armored vehicle was fired at, and while maneuvering out of enemy fire, it got stuck in the trench. Overall, this armored push was halted by a quick reaction by Ukrainian FPV drone operators. 4 days later, another Russian counter-battery strike using guided ammunition, Krasnopol, targeted a Ukrainian self-propelled howitzer located south of Siversk. On one end, Ukraine is getting more artillery shells. On the other, they're losing the howitzers necessary to fire them. That same day, on the 8th of June, the Russian Paras launched another attack against Razdolivka, this time 1,800 meters east from the railway line. Once again, the Ukrainians reacted swiftly and annihilated the enemy motorized rifle units. As you can see in this footage, Russian vehicles were struck by drone-dropped grenades, their entrenchments by artillery strikes, and their infantry by FPV drones. We can also quickly analyze this close-quarters combat action. There's a Ukrainian fire team of 4 soldiers defending some underground position and a trench line. And despite being flanked, they managed to repel the enemy fire team, using a combination of better tactics, but mostly FPV drone strikes. These soldiers actually belong to the K2 battalion of the 54th Mechanized Brigade. That I already told you about. Long story short, the Russian attack on Razdolivka was not going well. On the 12th of June, the commanders of the Russian 106 Airborne Division changed the cadence and attacked in the direction of Vimka. The operation was successful, and the paratroopers advanced 1,700 meters between the railway line and this road. As for Razdolivka, June 4th, fail, June 8th, fail. But we all know, third time's the charm, right? The Russian regiment commander in that sector tweaked his plan and went back on the attack. His assault detachment swarmed these Ukrainian tree lines from all directions. Even worse, one armored column reached the eastern end of Razdolivka. In this footage, we can see two BMPs approaching the village. The first one managed to disembark its infantry component, but as you can see, it's still very far away from the first buildings. And to make matters even worse, the vehicle got destroyed on its way back to base. Meanwhile, the Russians also pushed out from Vesele and gained 1,600 meters. Using a 3D map, we can notice their assault detachments managed to get hold of these literal hilltops, all the way up to the small forested area. After that, it will be 8 kilometers of flat open terrain until Siversk. Meanwhile, on the 13th of June, a Russian FPV drone struck a Ukrainian MTLB west of Lysychansk, most likely for medevac or during a rotation. This is very important because from an operational perspective, we can believe the objective of the Russian 106 Guards Airborne Division is to converge towards Siversk by attacking through three main axes, namely Razdolivka, Vesele, and Vimka. But they could also turn this triple action into a lovely foursome with a Russian flanking maneuver towards Verkhnokamianske. Because take a look at this here from the 21st of June. We see Russian drones harass Ukrainian troops. More importantly, we notice how smashed and lightly fortified Ukrainian positions actually are in this sector. Meanwhile, the Russians can't seem to capture the legendary stronghold of Spirne. So they're just turning it into a pile of ruins. So if one day the Russians actually take hold of Spirne and secure it, this could be a fifth axis of attack towards Siversk. According to the latest news on the 6th of July, Russian units raised the white-blue-red flag at the center of Spirne and claimed control over the eastern half of the settlement for the 20th time. On the 25th of June, using a UAV, the paratroopers dropped their divisional flag and attached it to the chimney of a factory at the center of Razdolivka. 4 days later, Russian telegram channels announced that the 106 Guards Airborne Division had established complete and confident control over the village. However, this seems to have been premature. In reality, on the 2nd of July, it was said that airborne units had just established a foothold inside Razdolivka. This is when fighting intensified and the entire settlement now laid in the gray zone. For example, in this video, a Ukrainian squad that had just disembarked from this armored vehicle was ambushed by drone-dropped grenades. Now with potentially 5 axes of attack from the south and the east, all that's missing is an attack from the north, and it's in the bag. But the Ukrainians prepared for that. Here from the Washington Post, US lifts weapons ban on Ukrainian military unit, aka the Azov Battalion. Do you remember Captain Palamar? He was captured in Mariupol with the bulk of Azov. On the 21st of September 2022, as part of a prisoner of war exchange, Palamar was released from Russian captivity. Captain Palamar is now deputy commander of a reformed Azov brigade, known under its official name the 12th Special Brigade Azov. Now the reason why I'm telling you all this is that the Ukrainians launched a preemptive strike in the Krymina forest. That's how on the 15th of June, Azov assault detachments and men from the 1st Presidential Brigade Burevi of the National Guard stormed the Russian positions in the Serebryansky forestry. That day, they captured an area 2 kilometers long and 1 kilometer deep. Thing is, Azov guys have PTSD from urban warfare. So now they prefer to fight in the middle of nature, forest and swamps, as far as they can from industrial areas. In this footage, we can see what this so-called forest looks like. The shattered trees barely provide any cover anymore, with the sinuous path of this trench line that Ukrainian artillery units shell in preparation of the assault. In this video, you can see how this Ukrainian assault squad is clearing an enemy trench network. The moment they receive fire, they respond quickly, throw smoke grenades, and then try to flank the position from above while throwing grenades. By the 29th of June, the Ukrainians made some more gains in the Serebryansky forestry, this time along the Donetsk River, inching their way towards Severodonetsk. In response, Russian aviation dropped a couple of FAB-500 bombs on the enemy in an attempt to halt them. Meanwhile, further north, Ukrainian forces also advanced 1,300 meters east of Terny and cancelled the territory the Russian army had gained throughout February 2024. So keep an eye on the Battle of Siversk since both sides are trying to flank the other and it's a mess. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The link is in the description below.